everybody. Welcome to this week's Clara City Library Creative Writing web series episode. This week, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we are going to start talking about fiction writing. And in particular, we're going to talk about creating complex characters. But before we get started, I wanted to show you, I'm on the Santa Clara City Library homepage here. And in this menu bar in the middle, we have a link to our summer reading program. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that link here. And it's going to give you some information about our summer reading challenge. And our theme this year is Reading is Magic. So if you click on that link to go to this page, you will see some information on how to sign up and get your account going. And it's kind of a fun activity for you and your entire family. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about creating complex characters. And so where do you begin when you're even starting to write a story? So there's a handful of different places you can begin when you're crafting any kind of story. You can start with maybe a setting or maybe your characters. You can start with if you have a plot idea, maybe you have a specific conflict you want to explore, or maybe some emotions that you want to sort of incorporate into a story. So each of these things have their strengths and their weaknesses, and each person's going to have their preferences. So by all means, kind of experiment for yourself and figure out something that works really well for your style. So what we are going to start with today is one of the areas I like to start with, which is let's figure out what our characters are going to be in this story. So, exciting stories are going to be made up of original characters. We want characters that are complex. We don't want really boring things that are predictable. So we not only want to explore sort of the external characteristics, that's all the physicality of our characters. So, what their voice sounds like, what they look like, what their haircut is, all those kind of physical things you can see. We really want to understand their internal characteristics. So what that means is sort of like the psychology of the character, what's going on in their brain. So a well-developed character is one where a writer really understands who the character is and how that character thinks. So this means that we're going to have to do a deep dive into our characters to really kind of figure out what makes them tick and what's going on the inside. So, that allows the writer to anticipate or even kind of learn how a character is going to react when a conflict is placed in front of them. And we'll talk about conflict in a later episode, but just to kind of sow the seeds here. So in addition to kind of the physical attributes and the general characteristics, we need to know what drives and what motivates this character. What is it ultimately that they want? What is important to them? And probably the most important thing, what are their flaws? Okay, so where do characters come from? So you can get your ideas from a multitude of places. So characters in your story, they might be modeled after real people you know. So maybe you might want to take real people you know and exaggerate some of their characteristics, some of the things that make them unique. Really bump those up to make them really exciting and exaggerated. And it might come from a combination of character traits from a number of different people. So you can kind of have an amalgam of a bunch of different people you know to create sort of a complex and interesting character. Or you might have a completely fictionalized character that you build from the ground up. Any one of these methods can work, but the ultimate goal here is really become a keen observer of people. Watch how they move, how they talk, how they act and react, and make notes. So if you still have your writer's journal, and you're outside or you are, hanging out with people, take some notes and make sure it's not so obvious that people get uncomfortable. But, you want to take notes and you want to be a real keen observer of character traits because some of those things might be incorporated down the line in your stories. Okay, so the who's who. This is really high-level creative writing 101. So our protagonist is going to be our starring role. That's the character that's going to make the journey to get what they want. And their actions are going to have consequences, both good and bad. And that's going to fuel your plot. And we'll talk about plot in a later episode. The antagonist is going to be the other starring role. So this is a character that exists to thwart your protagonist's plan or journey. So a compelling antagonist also is going to have their own sets of hopes, desires, fears, wants, so on and so forth. And a really well-developed antagonist is going to help create some compelling conflict. So each one of these is going to be an individual person. They're going to have good qualities. They're going to have bad qualities because we're human beings and we are very complicated. So always remember a well-developed antagonist, one that has a really clearly defined set of hopes, fears, desires, what they want, what their flaws are, is going to help create that compelling conflict. Okay, we also have our supporting characters. So these types of characters typically serve to help the protagonist accomplish their goal in some way, one way, shape, or form. They may be a close friend, or relative, or maybe even a talking animal. So supporting characters, they also have their own goals, and those can coincide with the protagonist. Or as the protagonist changes through their journey, these supporting characters may become antagonists. And so that can be an interesting plot twist for you. So just a really quick note about word sprints or free writing. So word sprints are a great way to get out of your conscious mind and into your subconscious to help you generate material. And the way we're going to do this is, number one, I'm going to ask you to set a time limit. So 5 to 10 minutes usually is a good place to start. You can just, set a timer on your phone, or if you have a clock. You want to pick a prompt, an idea, a word, really anything works. You just want something as a jumping off point to get you writing. You're going to start the clock, and then you are going to write. And this is the critical piece here. Don't take your pen off the paper or your hands off the keyboard. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to bypass our inner editor, and we want to allow our brain to free associate on the page. So you just want to keep writing for that entire time. You'll be amazed what your subconscious comes up with that you're not consciously trying to think of when you are worried about having perfect grammar or making sure you're writing the right things. You just want to keep writing. When the time's up, that's when we can review the work. You can highlight things that you find interesting or ideas that you could expand upon. So what we're going to start with is we are going to start with a character building exercise. So you're going to come up with a rough physical description, maybe how tall they are, their age, what they look like, what their haircut is, all those physical things. Maybe even how they walk or how they talk can be physical. And we're going to use a thing called the Proust questionnaire to explore an aspect of their internal characteristics. So, what is the Proust questionnaire? So if you go ahead and just search the web for Proust questionnaire, that's it, as in Marcel Proust, you can come up with, there will be a number of different sites that have this, but I have this one here I found on thewritepractice.com. I'll put a link to it in the description so you guys can access it. But basically what it's doing is Proust has come up with these 35 questions to really get to know the internal characteristics of your characters. So I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, and you can see there's a whole list of questions here. So here's the actual questionnaire, and there should be 35 of them. And it asks you questions like, what's your character's idea of perfect happiness? So maybe that's a prompt you want to use for your word sprint. Kind of take that into account and make up what your character's idea of perfect happiness is. Maybe you want to burn through these questions as quickly as possible and sort of answer them without thinking too hard on them. So maybe answer the first question, jump to the second one, jump to the third. Any way works. Whatever keeps you writing for that entire time, that's what we're going to do. So by the end of it, what we get to is we get to a real exploration of what's going on inside this character. This is going to help us understand what their hopes are, what their fears are, sort of where their flaws might be. So this is going to help us kind of really explore that character. Okay, so over the course of the week, I want you to use that Proust questionnaire, see if you can dive deep into your main character and really start to understand them. Once you've gotten a good understanding of the internal characteristics of your main character, I want you to use that Proust questionnaire to develop the polar opposite of that character. So for example, maybe if their idea of perfect happiness is seclusion in the wilderness, maybe the polar opposite character, their idea of perfect happiness is being, engaged in a big city, living in New York City, something like that. You get the idea. You want to create those polar opposites between the characters because that's going to help you create conflict down the line in your story, which we'll talk about in a later episode. But again, always allow yourself the freedom to explore, make up your character's own backstories for those things, why those things are true, and just have fun with it. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, as always, my name is Sim. Email me at librarians@santaclaraca.gov. Put creative writing in the subject line to make sure that it gets to me. And I hope this exercise was helpful. And we look forward to seeing you next week with the next part of our Creating Fiction web series videos. All right. Have a good time, guys.